Major funding for KPBS Evening Edition has been made possible in part by Bill Howe Family of Companies, providing San Diego with plumbing, heating and air, restoration, flood and remodeling services for over 40 years. Call 1-800-BILL-HOWE or visit billhowe.com. And by the Conrad Prebys Foundation, Darlene Marcos Shiley, and by the following. And by viewers like you. Thank you.
We begin with breaking news. The Supreme Court is preserving access to an abortion drug for now. Thanks for joining us. I'm Maya Trabulsi. Today, the justices rejected the restrictions imposed by lower courts, while a lawsuit filed by abortion opponents continues. A ruling by a Texas judge blocked FDA approval of mifepristone, often the first part of a 2-drug regimen to end pregnancies. It has been approved for use for more than 2 decades, and for now, the justices have left the case in the hands of the Fifth Circuit, scheduled to take up arguments on May 17th. Meanwhile, here in San Diego, 2 county supervisors say they are working to secure an emergency stockpile of abortion medications to make sure they are readily available to residents. High school sports events in San Diego have been in the national spotlight for all of the wrong reasons, and now a local lawmaker is taking action to address racist incidents on and off of the field. Here's KPBS reporter Jacob Ayer.
High school sports bring out lots of big emotions, both on the court and in the stands. Sometimes it brings out the ugly, including racist comments and actions. San Diego's Lincoln High School felt this issue firsthand less than 2 years ago.
We've been trained to accept it, and that's not okay. There is no place for racism in sports, in sports or anything else.
The school was on the receiving end of racially charged messaging on T-shirts and social media posts by some Cathedral Catholic High School students, says Lincoln High School football coach David Dunn.
And when we have to prepare our kids to potentially face racial comments, being stepped on, being spat at, being antagonized, being called out of their name during the contest in certain areas of the city, that's a whole nother ball game.
Around the same time, a tortilla throwing incident targeted at a mostly Latino team from Escondido's Orange Glen High School rocked the local high school sports scene and eventually led to sanctions against Coronado High School. Local Assembly member Akila Weber is looking to change those scenarios with AB 1327. It's also sponsored by the California-Hawaii NAACP.
This bill ensures that these incidents are reported and tracked, and the public and legislature are made aware of these every time they occur.
The bill would require the California Interscholastic Federation, or CIF, to work alongside community organizations and develop a standardized incident form to track racial discrimination or harassment that occurs at high school sporting events or games. Lincoln High School basketball coach Jeff Harper Harris says these types of incidents happen frequently on and off the court.
And I got 4 basketball players in the court. I get pulled over because the officer said it looked like we're casing the neighborhood. There's robberies. Now that incident with our kids in that car now turned over to the basketball game.
The CIF would also have to annually post results on their website.
And my end game is for my kids to be able to play at Lincoln High School and go play La Jolla, go up north of 805, play a basketball game that has nothing to do with race. When you win, you lose, you walk out of there, you still shake hands.
This bill will also require the CIF to report to the appropriate policy committees of the legislature and the governor on its evaluation and accountability activities undertaken every 3 years. Jacob Ayer, KPBS News.
San Diego city officials took the first step today to increase the number of ambulances on the streets. KPBS health reporter Matt Hoffman says the move comes after months of negotiating.
A deal between the city's ambulance provider Falck and the San Diego Fire Rescue Department means more ambulances will soon be out in San Diego. Falck is supposed to be providing 900 advanced life support ambulance hours every day, but they failed to consistently hit that number. Pending full city council approval, they'll soon be able to contract out any missing hours to another provider.
Our community needs to be able to rely on ambulances. When you call 911, you should expect to get a fire engine and an ambulance there for a medical emergency. And right now there's times when it's either delayed or there's not one immediately available at that time.
San Diego Fire Rescue Chief Colin Stoll says the subcontracting could add 10 more ambulances every day citywide.
Response time should actually come down. They should be quicker.
Since Falck took over ambulance services in late 2021, they've been fined about $3 million for delayed response times. If this framework is approved, they'll soon be subcontracting with their market competitor, American Medical Response, something that Falck's Chief Commercial Officer, Troy Hagan, says is the best way forward.
The market has changed. The labor force, especially in healthcare, is extremely challenged with the shortages that are post-COVID and everything. So the more that we can kind of pool those resources together, I think the more successful we'll be.
The contract amendment is the first step in a move for the San Diego Fire Rescue Department to take more control over emergency medical services. The chief says ambulances are getting to calls, just not as fast as he'd like them to. Something he and others have been concerned about is existing Falck paramedics being overworked or burning out due to staffing shortages. Tony Sorcy leads the union representing Falck paramedics. He says call volume has been high, and if you're not fully staffed,
you end up in a situation where there's just such a greater demand on the individual unit crew, and it creates horrendous working conditions for them.
Sorcy says this subcontracting amendment not only adds more ambulances, it also helps retain and attract new staff. If it's approved by the full city council, paramedics will see raises under a new bargaining agreement.
It's exciting. You know, I'm getting calls from people that used to work here 10, 15 years ago, and they want to come back.
The City Council's Public Safety Committee unanimously approved this subcontracting amendment, and the full City Council is set to take it up next month. Matt Hoffman, KPBS News.
Democrats and Republicans remain split over the construction of a physical border wall, but there is bipartisan consensus to build a virtual border wall. KPBS border reporter Gustavo Solis spoke with experts who say the virtual option isn't necessarily more humane or effective.
The border wall has been at the center of America's immigration debate ever since Donald Trump made it the centerpiece of his 2016 presidential campaign.
We're going to build a wall. It's going to be built.
But there's another border wall, a virtual wall, and it's received much less attention. It's a mass network of nearly 300 surveillance cameras, motion sensors, and military-grade drones, all spread across the border. They're very hard to find and aren't always in the places you'd expect. Sure, there are several cameras right next to the border in San Isidro, but there are also surveillance towers in residential neighborhoods and public parks. There's one in a community college, and even one near the Del Mar Dog Beach, 32 miles north of the actual border. Until a month ago, the exact location of these towers was a complete mystery. The Department of Homeland Security had not publicly disclosed this information.
But nobody really had a good sense of where these towers were.
Dave Moss is the Director of Investigations at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. He spent months mapping them out, and the result is the most comprehensive map of surveillance infrastructure along the U.S.-Mexico border. Moss says that the scope of this technology raises serious privacy concerns.
In the imagination of people in D.C. and in people in the national media, the border is just this desert wasteland, and then the only people you would ever encounter out along the border are human traffickers and cartels and smugglers. Now, folks in San Diego know that's not true. People live near the border.
And those people are in a constant state of surveillance.
And these towers can sometimes see up to like 7.5 miles. That is a lot of people's lives that they could pry into. And CBP really hasn't earned the trust of members of the community.
The sheer size and rugged terrain of the border make it nearly impossible to see the privacy concerns raised by this virtual border wall. But thanks to VR technology, we now have a better sense.
So what I have planned for you is we are going to go on a tour of a whole bunch of different locations from San Diego to Brownsville. So we'll do the whole border, and I'm going to show you a bunch of different technologies.
Our tour began right here in San Diego.
Okay, so we are going to start in some place that is fairly familiar to you. This is Friendship Park. And this is actually Friendship Park I think circa 2018 or something.
We covered hundreds of miles in mere seconds. Moss took me to.
So this is Naco, Arizona. So we are at Organ Pipe, the entrance to Organ Pipe National Monument in southern Arizona. But let me take you to Laredo, Texas, where we are now at a public park where people play soccer. This is in McAllen, Texas.
Customs and Border Protection says that these towers give agents in the field a significant leg up against criminal networks. They're an essential part of border security. And on this issue, there's agreement on both sides of the political aisle. In 2019, Democrats promoted the idea of virtual borders as a more humane alternative to former President Donald Trump's border wall. Here is San Diego Congressman Scott Peters describing the virtual wall.
It might be sensors and radar to spot moving people and objects in any weather or any time of day. It might be cameras mounted on drones to surveil places where the terrain is tough to monitor.
Peters did not respond to an interview request for this story. Despite the bipartisan support, experts say that these towers result in more migrant deaths, and they do nothing to prevent the most common method of drug smuggling, which is to simply drive through a legal border crossing. Sam Chambers is a researcher at the University of Arizona. He studies how border infrastructure contributes to migrant deaths.
People moving around out of sight of these towers means they're taking longer journeys.
And by taking longer journeys, they put themselves at risk of multiple health issues like
kidney damage or dehydration or a heat stroke are increased with this. So it's making the journey more dangerous and a greater risk of dying.
Chambers' research is only in Arizona right now, but he says that the new virtual map will help him study other parts of the border. Victor Clark Alfaro has been researching human and drug smuggling along the border since the late 1980s. He talks with human smugglers, known as coyotes, on a regular basis, and they tell him that the border towers are not stopping them.
Me dicen los coyotes que eso no ha sido ningún impedimento, que ellos continúan cruzando.
When it comes to drugs, the federal government's own data shows that most enter the U.S. through legal border crossings. Clark Alfaro says that putting up surveillance towers in remote parts of the desert isn't going to stop that.
Sabemos que uno de los lugares donde más drogas se cruza es el puerto de entrada de San Isidro, Estados Unidos. Bueno, ahí las torres no funcionan absolutamente para nada.
Clark Alfaro says it's really just a numbers game, and the numbers are stacked up against Customs and Border Protection, especially in San Isidro. Somewhere between 50 and 70,000 vehicles cross that port of entry every single day, and CBP agents only have the capacity to send a fraction of them to secondary inspection. Clark Alfaro says the volume is just too overwhelming.
Pero el volumen es enorme y eso representa una puerta de oportunidades.
Moss wants the virtual map that the Electronic Frontier Foundation created to lead to more informed policymaking on border enforcement.
Hopefully by putting this map out there, people can evaluate and say, hey, I didn't know this was going in near my house. I didn't know this was going in near my ranch.
Or at the very least, let people know who's watching them. Gustavo Solis, KPBS News.
Hearings in Washington this week delved into the subject of UFOs, or what the government now calls UAPs, unexplained aerial phenomena. Here in San Diego, a gathering of UAP experts and others interested in the subject is underway, and KPBS reporter John Carroll went to check it out.
In the most San Diego of settings, a very otherworldly conference is taking place at the Marina Village this weekend.
Hello, everybody. If you happen to just wander in, you could be forgiven for thinking this was just some sort of New Age conclave.
Here we go. Blessings.
But there is something quite serious going on here.
So we're at the threshold of a new time, possibly a new awakening of who we are in relationship to the rest of the cosmos.
The subject of UAPs, or UFOs, has been part of the culture since at least the Roswell incident in 1947. And since then, the government has done its best to debunk stories of UFO sightings. But since stories in the New York Times and on 60 Minutes in 2021, what many used to regard as fantastical has gotten into the mainstream. These shots were taken by Navy pilots off San Diego in 2004. And this week, a U.S. Senate subcommittee took up the subject with Sean Kirkpatrick, the director of the Pentagon's All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. He says they're investigating more than 650 cases of UAPs.
Of those over 650, we've prioritized about half of them to be of anomalous, interesting value.
There's more to life in the universe than what we have learned down through the decades of denial.
Dr. J.J. Hurtak describes himself as a social scientist and a futurist. He's been studying unexplained phenomena for several decades. He says people need to get comfortable with the notion that we're not alone in the universe, never have been.
There is real evidence to suggest that we need to take a look at the possibility of life in the universe, to see all sides of the question, and to gradually prepare for a step forward in terms of a new psychology and sociology, that if there is life in the universe, no big thing, we can accept that.
Or, to put it another way, with a nod to the X-Files, the truth is out there. John Carroll, KPBS News.
Chances are you or someone you know drives a Hyundai or a Kia, and you may even know someone who's had one stolen. It's a problem plaguing drivers of these two brands since 2021. And now, as Laura Aguirre reports, over a dozen states are calling for a mandatory recall.
Social media videos like this.
Y'all see they tried to steal my Kia, bro.
They busted out the back window, and then they broke off the locking mechanism to be able to actually steal it.
Are blamed for skyrocketing theft rates among Hyundai and Kia models in recent years.
Kids were being challenged to steal Kias, how many Kias you could steal by removing something on the steering column.
Kia and Hyundai have offered free software updates to fix the problem on over 8 million vehicles, but the attorneys general in 17 states and the District of Columbia say that's not nearly enough, noting it can take months for all owners to get that fix, and it doesn't cover all models. That AG coalition is now asking the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration for a federal recall of Hyundai and Kia models manufactured between the years 2011 and 2022, saying the vehicles easily bypassed ignition switches and lack of engine immobilizers make them particularly vulnerable to theft. The NHTSA says the thefts are blamed for at least 8 deaths and numerous injuries. The coalition's letter asks the administration to work with Hyundai and Kia to implement a recall and prevent additional harm to vehicle owners. I'm Laura Aguirre for KPBS News.
$787 million is the price that Fox News and its parent company will pay to settle a lawsuit over its 2020 election coverage. SDSU's Miro Kopik talks about the lasting effect of this major payout in the Friday Business Report.
Only the Alex Jones defamation lawsuit against the Sandy Hook families who sued Alex Jones got a nearly $1 billion settlement back in October. So these are really huge numbers. But in the case of Alex Jones, that is close to bankrupting the company. Whereas Fox, it's a different story. Fox could kind of pay it out of operating income. They have roughly $7 billion in kind of cash and cash equivalents on hand. So the actual financial impact, while painful, is not going to hurt Fox. There are several other lawsuits still in the mix. There's shareholder lawsuits that are being filed right now. And then another voting system company called Smartmatic filed the $2.7 billion claim, and that lawsuit is going to wind its way through most of the remainder of this year, next year, and maybe early 2025.
Border Patrol agents are not supposed to destroy humanitarian aid that's left along the border, but that is exactly what happened in the Otay Mountains. And KPBS border reporter Gustavo Solis says volunteers caught the interaction on video.
It started off as a routine water drop-off in March. Volunteers with the Borderlands Relief Collective found dozens of water bottles and cans of food dumped on the ground. This is how one volunteer described the scene.
Deliberate sabotage of humanitarian aid by Border Patrol agents.
When it happened, Emmett Norris confronted a couple of Border Patrol agents nearby. He got their response on video.
We're either empty it out or we try to clean it up. That one was too far for us to bring it out.
Norris says that the volunteers were disappointed with that answer.
Their words and their actions and their demeanor kind of speak for themselves, all of which kind of speaks to the underlying desire that it's not about saving people's lives or helping people. It's about policing and dictating people's freedoms.
Customs and Border Protection is now doing an internal investigation. In a statement, the agency says that leadership has specifically told agents not to remove or destroy humanitarian supplies left in the Otay Mountains. Last fiscal year was the deadliest on record for migrants crossing the border. More than 850 died. That's an average of more than 15 deaths each week. David Greenblatt is another volunteer with the collective.
We're doubling down and actually exerting 10 times our previous efforts as far as leaving supplies where they're needed in the mountains and deserts along the border.
Gustavo Solis, KPBS News.
Tomorrow is Earth Day, and there are a few ways that you can get involved locally. I Love a Clean San Diego expects thousands of volunteers to join what they say is the largest Earth Week cleanup event. It's their 21st annual Creek to Bay cleanup, and over 5,000 volunteers will pick up debris at more than 100 sites throughout the county. It all kicks off at South Crest Park tomorrow from 9 a.m. until noon. And this weekend is the first of two for Party for the Planet at Birch Aquarium at Scripps Institution of Oceanography. The event runs from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. and includes live music and earth-friendly crafts. There will also be two community art projects, and all of the activities are included with admission.
Well, your weather headlines for tonight: quiet with a few clouds, not a lot, just a few clouds. Warm and sunshiny on your Saturday, and we're going to continue a dry stretch of weather. Here's what things are looking like for you. Talked about the clouds. We're going to see patchy low clouds, and those temps will be at 57 degrees for the metro area. As we head around San Diego County, you'll notice as you're towards the shore, your temps are going to be anywhere between the 50s, low to upper 50s. Now, when you're in the higher elevations, you'll notice those temps are a little lower in the upper 40s. And we're going to see the same kind of trend as you go into your tomorrow. You're by the coast here, and you'll see those temperatures are not bad. Lots of sunshine on tap, and you're seeing the temps are in the 70s. Now, farther inland, you'll notice those temps are in the 80s. And in the mountains, you get a little bit of a difference. You'll see them anywhere between the 60s and 70s. Look, 96 degrees for you here. Oh, man, it's going to be a hot one for you. I want to show you the futurecast, and what you'll notice is we're pretty much free of clouds. Those patchy low clouds were an overnight thing. You go into your Saturday morning, quiet. There goes those patchy clouds again as you head into your Saturday afternoon. But really, things are nice and quiet. Here's your 5-day outlook for the coast. Here's the trend. Mostly sunny on Saturday, temps in the 70s. You're going to the 60s, and you end up in the 60s for the rest of that 5-day. For the inland, you'll notice that same trend. 80s on Saturday, 70s on Sunday, low to mid 70s for the rest of that 5-day. You go into the mountains, 60s on Saturday, upper 50s on Sunday, and then low to mid 50s for the rest of the 5-day. And into the desert, 90s, upper 90s on Saturday, low 90s on Sunday, and then 80s. 80s to around 90 for the rest of that 5-day, but generally pretty dry weather for all the areas you're seeing the 5 days. For your KPBS News forecast, I'm meteorologist Michelle McLeod.
The torrential rain that we've had this winter not only helped ease the drought, it also brought us what some are calling a super bloom. KPBS reporter Alexander Wen shows us some of the native flowers in bloom at Mission Trails Park.
As the gentle afternoon breeze rustles over a tiny white wild cucumber flower and a bird chirps in Mission Trails Regional Park, spring has sprung, as evidenced by the abundance of flowers blooming here.
What's blooming here? Everything. It's a great wildflower year for sure.
Heidi Gutnack is a ranger at the park. She says the string of winter storms have made everything a lot greener, and the flowers are popping up everywhere. But it's not quite a super bloom here in San Diego.
There are actually an abundance of certain types of flowers this year than we've seen in previous years. It's not kind of the same as, like, you know, in the desert when they have a super bloom where there's just like as far as the eyes can see.
She says the flowers are in pockets here and there at the park. There are gooseberry, morning glory, caterpillar phacelia, bush monkey, and popcorn flowers, and more.
And then all on the hillsides here you can see we have our beautiful local native California sunflower. There's also another native sunflower species we have here called San Diego sunflower.
The California sunflowers are bigger with a light yellow coloring and brown florets. The San Diego variety is smaller with golden petals and florets. And they're everywhere in the park. When people are talking about the California superbloom, they don't mean the California or San Diego sunflower. They mean the California poppies. And they can still be found in the park if you know where to look.
Oh, there you go. There's a beaut.
Goodneck says they are usually clustered on the hillsides. Look for the orangey patches in the sea of yellow. When you do visit the park, Goodneck says stay on the trails, take only pictures, and leave the flowers for the birds and the bees. Alexander Nguyen, KPBS News.
A special anniversary will be celebrated at Chicano Park tomorrow. It's been 53 years since the protest that led to the park's creation, and that number has special meaning in the Aztec calendar. It signifies new beginnings. The elders who fought for the creation of the park in the 70s will take a seat, giving the younger generation of Chicanos a new beginning as community leaders.
We're excited, but we're really nervous because no one wants to mess up. To be able to call yourself a Chicano comfortably and to be able to have a space to learn about your own history. Yeah, people give their lives for this, and to see another generation coming up with mine, it's beautiful.
The festivities kick off at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. San Diego pop-punk band Blink-182 is headlining the second weekend of Coachella. They will replace Frank Ocean, who injured his leg at the festival last weekend and then canceled his performance set for this Sunday. The original members of Blink-182 recently reunited for a world tour, and they are set to play here in San Diego in June. And you can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org. Thanks for joining us. I'm Maya Trabulsi. Good night.
Major funding for KPBS Evening Edition has been made possible in part by Bill Howe Family of Companies, providing San Diego with plumbing, heating and air, restoration, flood and remodeling services for over 40 years. Call 1-800-BILL-HOWE or visit billhowe.com. And by the Conrad Prebys Foundation, Darlene Marco Shiley, and by the following: by viewers like you. Thank you.